And these political upheavals take place against the background of an even more profound transformation, the Industrial Revolution. Enormous factories spring up first in England and then nearly everywhere in Europe. With the invention of the steam engine, manual labor is increasingly replaced by machines. The process will take over a century. Why did all of this begin in England, of all places? For centuries, using the experimental method to probe the secrets of nature had been part of the culture here. So there was a long run-up. And then there was the pleasure that English scientists and inventors took in the practical application of their knowledge. They fueled the Industrial Revolution. And among them was James Watt, inventor of the steam engine. The water in this boiler is heated to steam, and the resulting pressure can be used to drive other engines, a loom, for example, or a locomotive. During the middle decades of the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution spread in fits and starts across Europe. It was a peaceful conquest, but for many, the consequences were grave. Finally, people can free themselves of the constraints of agricultural production. Crop failures and famines that impact entire populations are a thing of the past in industrialized societies. But industrial work is poorly paid, dangerous, and exploitative. Until late in the 18th century, the only effective way of increasing the production of goods was to increase the number of humans employed to make them. Then the machines arrived. They didn't just replace muscle power, they also multiplied it. In factories like this one, huge machines performed the labor of hundreds of human beings. It was the most fundamental transformation in human social existence since the beginning of organized agriculture. In other words, it was a true revolution, an industrial revolution. The inventor of the term was none other than Karl Marx's close friend and collaborator, Friedrich Engels, who coined it in the 1830s in an analogy with the French Revolution of the 1790s. If the idea of communism had a birthplace, it would surely be Manchester. The unrestrained form of production that developed here came to be known as Manchester capitalism. In the mid-19th century, Friedrich Engels, whose father owned a factory like this one, could study as if in a laboratory the social and economic consequences of an unchecked capitalism. And in his writings, Karl Marx, Engels' friend, explored the implications.
Workers of the world unite.
Yes, that sounds good, but we need a strong message at the start.
The aim was to raise the workers against a system that kept them poor and weak.
That's good, that's good.
Yeah, not bad. A spectre is haunting Europe.
The spectre of communism.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Marx lives in exile in London. In 1848, he and Friedrich Engels published their Communist Manifesto, which will one day become the Bible of the global workers' movement. Marx and Engels called for a world without exploitative social relations, in which the means of production are owned not by capitalists, but by society itself, understood as a collective enterprise. Both of them reflect at length on the idea of revolution, but it's not until the early 20th century that the explosive potential of their ideas is fully realized. Meanwhile, the gap between rich and poor continues to expand. A workers' movement soon begins to take shape, and with it come political parties championing the rights of waged labor. And thus Karl Marx, who incidentally claimed never to have been a Marxist, influenced European history in several ways at the same time. The idea of the working class as a structural feature of all modern capitalist systems united people across borders into a sort of community of fate. The slogan, "Workers of the world unite," offered a counterweight to national egotism. In the last decades of the 19th century, left-wing parties gained power and pushed through social reforms in dozens of European parliaments. Only under the immense social and political stresses of the First World War did the socialist left fracture. A communism emerged, in whose hands the teachings of Marx hardened into an unbending doctrine. As the instrument of Soviet state power, communism became a force of global significance, and in Europe, the tension between communist and capitalist social orders split the continent down the middle.